Good afternoon. I'm David Blatt. I'm director of Oklahoma Policy Institute, and it is a great pleasure to welcome you to this afternoon's forum. It's very exciting to see so many people here. I'm just going to start with a few brief introductions and logistics for this afternoon's event. First of all, I want to take the opportunity to thank my staff who did a ton of work to help put this together. Megan Ben, our new outreach coordinator, was very involved in working with the speakers and putting this together. Kate Ritchie and Jean Perry, who you may have met when you came in, and also want to acknowledge the our office manager, Shiloh Kantz, who put together the packets and worked really hard while dealing with a 2-year-old who seemed to have mono. So very grateful to her for that. You should all have received a packet when you came in. Materials of all the presentations for those presenters who have PowerPoints are in the packets. This is also going to be up on our website. If you go to okpolicy.org, it should be at the front of the website, or okpolicy.org/economist-forum. I've also included the executive summary of a paper that came out this week by two of the most distinguished economists in the state who are not going to be speaking today, Wilner and Bob Doffenbach, who looked at trends in state tax collections, very relevant to what we're going to be talking about here. That paper is up on the website. If you go to the event website, you'll also be able to find some other materials related to today's events. You'll be hearing a lot about the Laffer study put out by Oklahoma Council of Public Affairs. There's a link to that study there. We did invite OCPA to make copies of the report available for this gathering. They decided not to do so. On the left side of your packets, you'll see some information about Oklahoma Policy Institute. I won't go into much detail about us, but there's lots of links where you can find out more about us. You'll also see subtly, maybe not that subtly, included in the packet a contribution envelope. For those of you who are not already supporters, we are a nonprofit organization. We count on the assistance from individuals as well as organizations and business. And if you are in a position to help us out with a check or a credit card contribution, that would be greatly appreciated. Let me just tell you how this is going to unfold today. I will soon be introducing Scott Meacham to give an introduction to the event. Then each of our speakers will come up individually and introduce themselves. Their bios are in the packet, so we're not going to read off the bios. I think you will be easily convinced that they're all very distinguished and have had long careers, so we're not going to take up time with that. We've asked each of our speakers to speak for 12 minutes at most. At the 10-minute mark, I will flash the 10-minute sign. At the 12-minute mark, I will hit the bell, and after that, the orchestra that is waiting in the wings will strike up, and it'll be like the Academy Awards, and people will be played off the stage. One important thing, we're going to take questions, written questions only. There are some index cards on each table, so at any point, if you have a question that you'd like to ask, please write your question down and hold it up, and Megan will come get the card. We'll get the cards to Scott. After everybody has given their presentation, all the panelists will assemble on the stage, and we will have hopefully a good 15-20 minutes at least for questions. We look to have you out of here around 3 o'clock, certainly no later than 10 after 3 or 3:15. Final thing I'll mention is that you're all, I'm sure, going to be giving the panelists your undivided attention. But if you're dividing your attention with Twitter, which I'm sure some people are, we set up a handle or a Twitter feed of, I see Jean paying rapt attention. It's going to be Economist Forum. So if you do want to tweet from here, include the hashtag Economist Forum, and those who are not here can join. We will have all the materials, as I said, on the website. This is being filmed, and we will have, hopefully soon, the video feed. Last thing I'll mention, 1 o'clock on Sunday, OETA Forum. Several of the economists were interviewed today by OETA. So for others who may not be here, encourage them to watch that show on Sunday afternoon. A week from Sunday. I'm sorry. Okay. So without further ado, Scott Meacham.
Thank you, David. My name is Scott Meacham. I used to work across the street here. Some of y'all may remember. It's interesting. I served 8 years in state government, about 2.5 years doing what Lex Holmes did, not as well as Lex, of course, but doing what Lex Holmes did as state finance director, and then 5.5 years as state treasurer, and served all 8 years as Governor Henry's director of finance, cabinet secretary for finance and revenue. You know, as I was driving over here, I was reminded of a quote by Benjamin Franklin. There's nothing certain in life except for death and taxes. Now, I'm sure many of you have heard that. I wonder if you've heard Oklahoma's own Will Rogers' spin on that. Will said that the only difference between death and taxes is that death doesn't get any worse whenever Congress meets. Now after this session, Will might be tempted, if he was still alive, to change that to the Oklahoma legislature. It's certainly election year in Oklahoma, and Oklahoma is no stranger to the discussion of tax cuts in election years. Only this time, the debate is a little different. I would say that it is more substantial. It is more far-ranging, it is more serious, and there's significant talk about elimination of the state's income tax. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of talk yet about what you're going to replace it with or what you're going to cut when you get rid of the state's income tax. And I think and you'll hear more from these speakers on these various topics, but I think as you're listening to them, there's several things that you ought to keep in mind to kind of give you a framework. Thing number one, despite what you may hear anywhere, Oklahoma is doing very, very well versus the rest of the country. Oklahoma in the last 10 years, under any objective measure, we're one of the top performing states in the country, whether it's domestic product growth, employment, whatever statistic, and you'll hear a lot of information, I think, from Commerce that will share some of those statistics with you. So we are doing very, very well in Oklahoma. So on the one hand, whatever our tax structure is in Oklahoma, it is doing a good job of not holding us back. And on the other hand, we really don't want to do anything to mess it up, okay? And that's what you always got to be careful about when you start getting political solutions to problems that may not really exist. The second thing you need to remember is that any state's taxes come from a variety of sources. And typically the three sources that are taxed are either consumption, such as sales taxes, things like that, excise taxes, income, such as income tax, right, and property, such as the property tax or severance taxes on, let's say, gross production taxes on oil and gas. Every state has some balance of taxing those three aspects in some way, and every state differs in some way. And some states, like Texas, will be a little heavier maybe on property tax, but less on income tax. Although Texas does have, in effect, an income tax on business that they call a franchise tax. So remember that. Another fact is, remember that Oklahoma is already a very, very low tax burden state. I thought it was interesting when I was reading some of the materials that have been put out, there was a lot of discussion about the combined state and local tax rate on Oklahoma citizens. And that is relevant because that is a good measuring stick to compare you to other states as far as what your overall taxes are. And we compare very favorably when you do that. But I think if you're talking about economic stimulus, and I think perhaps the economists would agree with me, you have to look at the total tax dollars out of your pocket. State, local, and federal tax dollars. And by living in Oklahoma, by virtue of having a state income tax, we actually pay less income tax in Oklahoma than our friends in Texas do because they don't get to deduct that state income tax on their federal returns. And so when you look at comparisons, the last one I saw was based on 2007 data, Oklahoma was 50th out of the 50th state in total tax burdens that our citizens pay by virtue of living here. So we're a low tax burden state. But at the same time, we're a low spending state. And if you look at how Oklahoma compares to other states on spending, we are at or near the bottom in almost every major category, whether it's health, whether it's education, whatever it is, we're at or near the bottom. And we've cut spending significantly as we've gone through the recession the last few years. Significant cuts. About half of our budget goes to education. And if you add in DHS and corrections, you're up to about 65%. If you take the largest 12 agencies, that's going to account for about 92% of the state's budget. I think it's interesting because when anybody does a study of spending in Oklahoma of any particular category, whenever it's an impartial, neutral study, they always come up with not that we're spending too much, that we're spending too little. I remember several years ago we had a big study of our corrections spending in Oklahoma, and the finding was we weren't spending enough. Just recently, you probably read in the paper that the powers that be have decided that we're underfunding DHS by several $100 million a year, and that's what's leading to a lot of the problems we're having. I don't know where Howard Hendrick was when that was announced, but Howard Hendrick had been saying that for years and been saying for years to us, if we do not start funding this agency better, we are going to have problems you all are not going to like. And Howard was absolutely true. So when you're hearing these comments, keep those things in mind. And remember, there is no one best tax structure, but Oklahoma's is what it is. It's developed over time. Businesses and industry and individuals in this state have adapted to that structure, and that any change you make of that structure, somebody's going to be affected. If you eliminated all the credits in the state, somebody's going to be affected. That's going to be less available for business, for investment, and perhaps you'll hear a little bit about that today. If you shift it all to consumption, people are going to pay more to buy things. And it's interesting in this debate, we're not hearing anything from business other than we like the tax structure in Oklahoma. We keep hearing again today, Google announced bringing new jobs to the state, Boeing, all these companies bringing jobs to the state. Why? Because they like Oklahoma and they like our tax structure. Now with that, I'm going to turn it over to the experts because I'm just a guy that used to talk for a living. I guess I still am. So I'm going to turn it over to the experts, and I'm going to introduce to you Deidre Myers, who's the Director of Policy Research and Economic Analysis for the Oklahoma Department of Commerce. Deidre.
Thank you, Scott. One of the great pleasures that I have in my job is I have the responsibility to travel around Oklahoma and provide economic information and data to concerned Oklahoma citizens. And it's in this avenue of service that David and his staff very graciously invited me to participate today, and in that same vein of my responsibilities that I very happily accepted. That being said, the Oklahoma Department of Commerce, of course, as a state agency, does not advocate nor do we lobby for or against any legislative bills that are going on. So I want to make clear that my purpose here today is simply to provide the economic data that sets the platform for today's discussion. And what you will see are the same economic data that I provide to the governor and her administration, as well as the legislative leadership on a monthly basis through our economic snapshot that is provided through the Oklahoma Department of Commerce. So with that, I'll start with what we consider some of the major economic measures that we study, we analyze, we review to look at the economic performance of the state, as well as try to determine some of the future trends that are going to be going on with the economy. Now, that in mind, I always look at the economy in terms of economic development. And we are interested, from the point of view of Oklahoma Department of Commerce, is increasing the quality and quantity of jobs in Oklahoma. So we're very oriented towards employment and capital investment, because as we all know, when businesses invest capital, they have more machinery, they have more items, and that means they need more people. And so it is a cyclical kind of structure. So today I want to look at four basic things quickly: employment, labor force, income, and wealth. The first thing, and Scott was right, is that Oklahoma is outperforming many, many states in the nation. We're always in the top quintile, and when you look at this particular graph, this is the year-over-year growth by state. Now, you'll notice that to the far left, the top performer, and this is going to be February to February over the last year, the top performer is North Dakota. North Dakota with the energy boom that is going on in the plays up there, and the energy industry is basically just wiping the slate with every other state. However, please look at the second bar in the top performing states over the past year, and that would be the blue bar of Oklahoma. And in all of the charts and graphs that I have, Oklahoma is going to be blue, the other states are going to be red, and the contiguous states around Oklahoma are going to be green because they are envious of our awesome economic performance. So Oklahoma performed over the last year at a 2.8% employment growth rate. As you can see, that there are a number of states here, and there are some that in fact did not have employment growth over the past 12 months. So, in looking at the top states, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Utah, Texas, Colorado, Louisiana, much of the employment growth that is happening in the nation right now is a factor of energy. However, in Oklahoma, while we talk about energy being one of our key components, it also drives manufacturing. And as we see later, that's going to be a huge part of the growth that we've had. Month-over-month employment, basically the blue in these columns, here are the months over the past 12 months, starting with February 2011. The blue part of the column is manufacturing employment change. If it's above the line, it's growth. If it's below, it's a contraction. The red is all other industries or all other employment. Now, manufacturing is very, very important when I'm looking at how the economy is performing and how it's going to go forward for a number of reasons. Manufacturers keep themselves very lean. They do not hold inventory, and so they are very reactive to contracts and to the market. So they will hire people when they have work, and they will let them go when they do not have work. Therefore, if we have a continuous string of manufacturing growth, we know that we are getting contracts, that items are moving. So when I see, if you notice, from August 11 on, we have positive blue growth. And it's not a spiky kind of growth where you see 1 month and then it's back down. In fact, it's wonderful, slow, sustainable growth. And this is also a change because manufacturers in 2009, 2010, 2011, the early part of 2011, were hiring temp because they weren't sure if there was going to be sustained economic activity. And in fact, what we're finding is that the employment growth is happening in the manufacturing industry, not in the temporary employment services industry. So this is a big change in terms of our economy and the manufacturer business owners believing that there is going to be continued and sustained growth. Year-over-year manufacturing growth, look at that blue bar to the far left. Yes, that's Oklahoma. We led in the past 12 months at 7.1%. 15 states did not have any manufacturing growth over the past 12 months. Look at where you find the closest, the green bar, Texas at 3.0, and then you have Kansas and Colorado. Kansas is being fueled by an upsurge in aerospace, and Texas, of course, has the energy component as well. One of the things that Secretary Lopez always likes to remind me when I show him this is that North Dakota's employment growth is fueled a lot by Oklahoma's manufacturing growth. We're manufacturing the pumps and valves that are being used to pull the oil and gas out of those plays in Northern America. And so the growth that is happening along the upper Midwest is really helping our economy as well. February unemployment rates, you can see Oklahoma, in terms of the region, has the lowest. This is the February preliminary at 6%. Texas is at 7.1%. And you can see where we are. This is the first time that we haven't been in the lowest quintile for a while. But one of the things that I want you to notice is look at the states that are actually below us in unemployment rate. Those are not high population states, nor did they have population growth. Only Minnesota and Virginia have unemployment rates lower than ours that actually have more than 3 million people or had population growth that was above 5% in the previous 10 years. So we're talking about when you're looking at the kinds of states that have strong population and strong people moving into them, Oklahoma is in the top 3 or 4. The other thing is Minnesota is having pretty significant employment growth because people are living in Minnesota and having to travel to the Dakotas to work because the Dakotas simply don't have enough people. The same is kind of happening in Iowa and Nebraska. So you see that Dakota employment is really kind of figuring there. Labor force. When we look at employment and unemployment rates, one of the things that is important to remember when you think about an unemployment rate is, why is the unemployment rate changing? Is the unemployment rate going up because there's a loss of employment, or is the unemployment rate going up because there's an increase in labor force? More people are looking for jobs after the end of the recession. And one of the things that has happened is in the second half of 2011, Oklahoma's unemployment rate scooched up just a little bit from about 5.5 to 6, and there was a little bit of concern, and I was going around the state saying, no, this is exactly what we need. We need the people to come back into the labor force and to become active again, searching for employment. We have employment growth, and our unemployment rate is going up just a little bit because more people are looking for work. This is a wonderful thing, particularly in the side of the business, because they have a larger supply of labor from which to choose their skilled and knowledgeable workers. So this is actually, the unemployment rate. Now, one of the things, if you look, this is an index with 2,000 being 100, equaling 100. You can see that we actually, in the Tulsa MSA, had a decrease in labor force over the 10 years, which is not good considering we had a population growth in the MSA. The same can be said of Oklahoma MSA, which is in orange. And look at Oklahoma. We only went to 6% over the decade. However, the state grew by 8.7%. So this is one of the concerns that we have in our future growth is there a gap? Do we have a problem with the labor supply that we need to continue the employment growth that we've been experiencing and we project to go forward? Employment growth will be dampened or moderated if we do not have the skilled labor that we need to actually take those jobs. You can see at this end on the far right, when we get to the second half of 2011, we have nice spikes in labor force in all of our MSAs and in the non-Oklahoma MSA area, and it's a phenomenon that is not happening in the U.S. So this is very, very positive movement and says a lot about the psychology of households in Oklahoma. Households feel very positive about the economy and the way employment is changing because they're looking for work. Now, one of the things I mentioned when I look at the long-term trend of labor force is that we do have a possible structural gap that is happening, or structural unemployment. There's a lot of debate right now on the national scene, and Chairman Bernanke addressed this in his latest address, whether our unemployment is structural or cyclical. And I would say in Oklahoma, we still have slack. We still have some unemployment left over from the recession that is due to a cyclical, but most, I think, of our MSA unemployment is going to be looking at a structural kind of gap. We have so many openings right now in terms of our production occupations, our mining occupations, and we simply don't have the people who have those right skills, knowledge, and abilities to fill those very high-paying jobs, particularly in the aerospace and energy industries. When we look at the new jobs that are going to be created from 2000 to 2010, we can see that a large portion of them, nearly 50%, require some college, some vocational skill, at least an associate's degree, something beyond a secondary degree to be successful in the employment and workplace. Right now, when you look at the educational attainment, nearly 50% just have a high school degree and only 33%. So you can see that we have a big gap opening up in terms of the labor force that we have. When we get to income, this has been another one of the positive signs that we've seen in the past couple of years. And you can see that this is the per capita personal income as a percentage of the U.S. 100, the 100 mark there, is what the U.S. would be. The blue line with 89.7 is Oklahoma. You can see that we had a big spike during the energy boom in 2008. We came down with recession, but we're heading back up. In 2011, Oklahoma had 1% growth. The only other state in the region that had growth was Texas at 0.5%. So again, very, very good indicators in terms of growth. Median household income. This is another indicator that shows income and wealth, and I want to explain that even though we're having wonderful movement in terms of a macro look for the state, it is not homogeneous across the state. There are households that are not experiencing the same economy as we see on a macro level. And you can see that these red counties that are in the southeast and the southwest have nearly, a third to a half of the median household income of our state or our better or higher counties. So we have a real problem in the distribution of wealth, and noticing that a lot of the jobs we have are still low wage. Finally, Oklahoma households in poverty. What we see here is that the statewide percentage for poverty is 16.2%. The US is 13.8. So we're over 3 percentage points over the US in terms of poverty, households in poverty, and you can see how it's distributed among the state. Just as an FYI, Texas is 16.8. So they have a slightly higher percentage of their households in poverty than does Oklahoma. So that is a very, very quick overlook of how the economy is performing. When we look at future expectations, the Oklahoma Department of Commerce is very, very excited.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Wilner. I'm professor of economics and chair of the Department of Economics at Oklahoma City University. Haven't used a clicker, so this is my first try, see if it'll work. I want to thank you for being here today. I hope I'm not too boring, especially compared to the Laffer report. When I read it, I was having a good time, and then somebody pointed out that there were folks in the state that were taking it as serious economic analysis. That scared me right off the bat. It's not serious economic analysis. It is, however, seriously deficient as economic analysis. Each of the panelists today is going to come up with a litany of the errors of omission and errors of commission in the report. But I want to say right up the front that the Laffer report has a good deal of data in it, and I'm going to refer to data as facts, just the facts, ma'am, as Joe Friday said. But what Joe Friday wanted was all of the facts, not a selected few of the facts, because he actually wanted to know what happened and the circumstances of it. The Laffer report uses a lot of very carefully selected facts and omits a lot of others. So I view this report as either some type of an effort to persuade. It's either sophistry or rhetoric. And based on my reading of it, it's pretty much pure sophistry. Now let's see if this works. Hey, there we go. So on that, I want to talk about an observation of a Nobel laureate. I'm not sure which one of them anymore, who pointed out that in a country as big as the United States, you can find an example of anything. And that's what I want to talk about. Each one of these examples is a data point, a datum, and you can very carefully choose them. So when I was a freshman years ago, seems like centuries ago, it certainly was last century, at the University of Colorado in Boulder, as a freshman, I took a course called MCDB 315 from Dr. Prescott. It was biology of the cancer cell. It absolutely pinned my ears back. I got a D in the class, and it was as good a grade as I could have hoped for. It was an amazing class. Anyway, he told us this story. I have no reason to believe it's false. This is a lecture all of me and 500 of my best friends who I don't know the names of. And this is the story told. This biology cancer class, it's very serious. Dr. Prescott is working on what's called cell cycle analysis, which is try to understand how best to treat cancer in the real world. Can we cure it? How are we going to do it? So he told the story. There once was a man in California who, for months, kept feeling worse and worse and worse, and he just wouldn't go to the doctor. Finally gave up, he went to the doctor. Well, it was too late. The doctor took x-rays, did tests, and lo and behold, he has metastasized cancer, and it's so thoroughly metastasized, treatment is not an option. It really isn't. They can manage the pain. Well, the guy obviously said, I'm going for a second opinion. More x-rays, more tests, sorry, same story. And this is the 70s, so he's pretty much out. Well, he's very despondent. So what does he do? He goes out and buys a case of wild turkey liquor, goes on his back porch, gets drunker than a skunk for 6 months. After about 6 months, and he finally sobers up, realizes it's a hangover, not cancer, he goes back in and checks the doctor, and the doctor says, whoa, you're cured. No more cancer. So what can we conclude from that? Well, this is a fact. This actually happened. At least Dr. Prescott said it was. So what's going to happen? Well, some people really want to believe that wild turkey caused cancer. Now, if it was Scotch, I might go there, but I don't like wild turkey. And they'll point this out. You know, wild turkey, this guy was cured. So wild turkey cured cancer. That's a bit of a problem. And they'll go ahead and put that forward. My guess is the purveyors of wild turkey won't make the claim, but they're not going to expend any effort saying that it's false. And I think people are basically like that. What we want is a story that supports our view. So when you have a predilection to believe something, you're looking for that story that matches. And what Art Laffer and his company have done is they've found some stories that people want to hear, or at least some people want to hear. Now, what Dr. Prescott wanted us to understand from that story was that one of these single events, one of these carefully selected datum, is probably not a good way to make decisions. Another case of this that I've used with my wife before is that, every year somebody jumps out of an airplane, which I don't understand to begin with, and their parachute fails. They fall to the earth and they survive. We can conclude from that we waste money by giving the 101st Airborne parachutes, correct? So I tend to think we need to look at more of that. We need to have all of the data to make a decision. That's where I want to be. So data in the Laffer report, to the best of my knowledge, they don't share it, you have to go get it yourself, appears to be accurate. They've done a good job finding examples. In the process, they omitted the rest of the story, massive quantities of the rest of the story, so they're only providing some of the facts. For example, they choose a variety of different starting periods on the tables you're supposed to look at and the charts you're supposed to look at. Sometimes they start at 2001, sometimes they start at 2000, sometimes 2003. Then they'll land at 2008, 2009, 2010. You'll be looking at 8 years, you'll be looking at 10 years. And you're supposed to believe that these are actually comparable. Well, actually, they're not really comparable at all. And therefore, they're not really providing you information. This person survived an airplane fall without a parachute. So-and-so's had their cancer cured by a wild turkey. Let's be very careful with our choices. And one of the issues has to do with the start and end dates include or do not include recessions that occurred. And by choosing when you start and when you end, you can very strongly influence the appearance of the data. Perhaps the most important question is, when the data is available, longer data, in some cases that they reported, it goes back to 1929 from the site where they got their sources, why don't they include all of the data? It's there, it's available, so they've omitted a massive amount of facts for no apparent reason. Another issue is not simply the choice of the data that they used, but what do people actually get concerned with in these things? Well, I don't think it's what Laffer et al. Were actually concerned with. But before we get there, I want to talk about something that absolutely amazes me. This guy has a PhD in economics. And in a lot of the report, obviously you don't want to be consistent with this, in a lot of the report he uses nominal data. That is data that isn't adjusted for inflation. By doing that, they systematically increase the stated growth rates. There's no reason not to adjust for inflation. It's relatively easy. The data to do so is available. You can adjust it a couple of different ways, and everybody with an econ degree knows how to do that. Most of my undergraduates know how to do that, or they're going to flunk the test. So it's not really difficult to do. But I think most people are more concerned with their own income per capita. Laffer sticks with gross state product and gross personal income. And while they move together, higher personal income for the state does not mean higher personal income per capita. I think most people are most concerned with per capita. And to drive home the difference, also because I find this interesting, think about differences between the United States and China. On an absolute value, gross domestic product, adjusted for purchasing power parity across countries, the United States and China are the two largest economies in the country, or in the world, not in the country. And we're only about 30% larger than China. But on a per capita basis, an individual basis, we're only number 7 in the world, and China's number 90. The average American produces, and as a result has an income that is 6 times greater than that of the average Chinese. So why are we so obsessed with having high personal income as a state and not thinking about what does the individual have, personal income per capita within the state? I'll get back to that in a minute. I don't understand either why Art Laffer, when he's looking at the past, looks at gross state product, and at the future, looks at personal income. These are not the same things, but he seems to treat them equally. Now, this is, yeah, that's the one I want. So I went back. I'm a professor, so I can justify this. Playing with data is what I do, and I really enjoy it, so this is actually kind of fun. I went back and looked at personal income, adjusted for inflation, since 1929. This is something you can actually do. This whole table took me an hour to retrieve the data from the sites that Laffer used and build this pretty little picture here. And what it's looking at is real, not nominal, gross state income and per capita state income relative to that of the United States across time. I found it very interesting because starting sometime in the late 1960s, Oklahoma's personal income and per capita income started catching up with that of the average for the nation. Started catching up. We're moving in the right direction. We're catching the average. And it peaked sometime, let's see. Do y'all remember the early 80s? And then it started to go down, and it started to come back up around 1999, 2000. Now these movements are stunningly similar to the movements in the real price, inflation-adjusted price of oil. And I kind of think that probably matters in the state of Oklahoma. Oh dear, I've got to hurry up. So anyway, looked at the top 10 states that Laffer was looking at, the nine states that grew so well. Let's see, Oklahoma, bit of oil there. Alaska, oil. Wyoming, I used to roughneck there for 7 years. I know about oil in Wyoming. Louisiana has a bit of oil, and so does Texas. We're talking major states with major growth. And can you go ahead and yeah, might as well. My wife is pleased you're holding that to me, so I'll shut up. So there's an awful lot of errors in there, and I've argued that Laffer's simple-minded presentation uses carefully selected, non-comparable, and inconsistent facts to make their case. Further, that many of the facts of equal standing were omitted. It suffers from a heroic case of what we call omitted variables bias. For example, their idea of what makes a state grow. Pretty simple. Population, well, that's a no-brainer. Share of taxes is a share of income, and the top combination of federal and state income tax rates. Apparently, those are the only things that make a state's economy grow. There's no role for human capital, there's no role for capital, there's no role for infrastructure. Those are the only three variables they use. If you evaluated a company on this basis, looked at their cash flow, their profit statement, you're basically saying that having more workers is a good idea, but paying for them is a bad idea. Yeah, that's pretty much true. The only thing Laffer included was the negatives. There was no possibility of a positive effect for anything but population in their regressions. For these reasons alone, the report's not up to standards of economics. It provides no useful information, unless, of course, you already want to believe that wild turkey cures cancer. I hope that Oklahoma won't choose the wild turkey, even in small doses. It's a nice story, it's apparently funny, but it's really bad medicine. Thanks.